They laughed when I walked in. Not all of them. Some only smirked. Others turned their heads away like I'd tracked dirt onto a sacred floor. But the sound still rolled through the chamber in a low, poisonous wave. 300 alien nobles, robed in light-reflecting silks and crystalline metals, filled the summit hall of Astra Prime. Their eyes, gold, violet, ember-bright, settled on me with a shared conclusion. I didn't belong. I was the only human in the room, maybe the only one on the station. My name, Jack Miller, had been printed on a guest slate by someone brave, careless, or already dead. No crest, no house, no rank worth acknowledging. Just observer. The Unity Summit was supposed to be historic. New treaties, shared borders, a symbolic beginning under a new empress. For them. For me. It felt like stepping into a courtroom where the verdict had already been passed. I moved along the edge of the chamber, keeping my shoulders squared, eyes forward, searching for an empty seat. The tables curved inward toward a raised central platform, each position marking power and lineage. Every time I approached an open chair, something happened. A noble's cloak slid over it. A clawed hand rested possessively on the surface. A quiet laugh followed. "Human," someone muttered, not bothering to lower their voice. "Is this a joke?" another replied. Heat crawled up my neck, but I didn't react. Reacting was weakness. That lesson had cost me enough already. By the time I reached the far end of the hall, I understood the truth they were making painfully clear. There was no seat for me here, and they were enjoying watching me realize it. I was still standing when the guards started toward me. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Two of them detached from the perimeter near the central dais, their armor matte black, ceremonial blades hanging uselessly at their sides, symbols more than weapons, but symbols with teeth. The laughter around the hall softened into a murmur, the kind that only exists when people are confident something ugly is about to happen to someone else. I felt it then, that familiar tightening in my chest. The old instinct. Lower your head. Apologize. Make it easy. I didn't. I stayed where I was, hands loose at my sides, jaw set. If this was how it ended, escorted out like a stain on polished crystal, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me shrink. "Human," one of the guards said as he closed the distance. His voice was calm, practiced. "You are not assigned a seat." "I know," I replied. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Then you will leave the chamber." I was invited. That earned a few sharp laughs from nearby tables. Someone clapped once. Mocking. "Slow." "By whom?" the second guard asked. I opened my mouth and froze. Because I didn't have an answer that would save me. The name I'd been given, the minor official who'd stamped my clearance and smiled too quickly when I asked if this was really approved. He hadn't shown up. I noticed earlier. An empty space where his delegation should have been. At the time I'd assumed a delay. Now, standing under 300 alien stares, I realized the truth. He hadn't delayed. He'd disappeared. "Escort him out," a voice called from the crowd. "Before he embarrasses us further." The first guard reached for my arm. That was when the room changed. Not gradually. Instantly. A pressure swept through the hall, like a held breath finally released. The murmurs died mid-word. The laughter choked off. Even the guards froze, not because of anything I'd done, but because of the sound that followed. A single footstep. Then another. Metal against crystal. Measured. Unhurried. I looked up. Empress Nyra Solen had risen from her throne. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. Her very movement rewrote the rules of the space. The nobles nearest the dais stood so quickly their chairs scraped loudly across the floor, the sound sharp and panicked. Those farther away followed a half-second later, like a delayed echo. Nyra stepped down from the dais alone. No guards flanked her. No attendants rushed to her side. She moved through the center aisle as if the hall existed solely to give her room to walk. Her presence was precise, controlled, every motion deliberate, as if she were conserving something valuable. Her gaze passed over the nobles without interest. Then it found me. For a heartbeat, we just looked at each other. Her eyes weren't warm. They weren't kind. They were bright and assessing, like a blade held up to the light. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't since the worst moments of my life back home, when everything I thought defined me had already been stripped away. She stopped in front of the guards. "Release him," she said. The words were quiet, unadorned. The guard holding my arm hesitated. Every instinct I had screamed at me to pull away, to step back, to disappear, but Naira Solen was already reaching for me. Her hand closed around mine. The contact was unmistakable. Real. Cool skin, firm grip. Not symbolic. Not accidental. The hall erupted, not in sound, but in shock. Gasps. Sharp inhales. The scrape of chairs as nobles leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. I felt every eye in the room snap to us. The human and the Empress. Linked like this was the most natural thing in the world. "You're sitting with me," she said. She didn't ask. She turned, still holding my hand, and began walking back toward the dais. For a second, I didn't move. My feet felt anchored to the floor, my mind struggling to catch up with what my body was already doing, following her. We passed tables where moments earlier I'd been ignored, mocked, erased. Now faces twisted with confusion, anger, disbelief. I caught fragments of whispered words in half a dozen languages. Is this a provocation? She's testing us. This is madness. Naira didn't slow. At the dais, she guided me up the steps and toward the imperial table. Only then did I see it, the seat beside her throne. Empty. Deliberately so. The nobles knew it. I could tell by the way their expressions shifted, by the sudden tension that rippled outward. That seat wasn't unclaimed. It was reserved by absence. Naira released my hand only long enough to pull the chair out. "Sit," she said. I did. The sound of me taking that seat echoed louder than any laughter had earlier. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the shock and the fear and the dawning realization that my life had just been violently rerouted, a single thought surfaced, clear and undeniable. They had laughed when I walked in. They weren't laughing anymore. If you've watched this far, then this story is really interesting to you. Please confirm it by clicking like under this video. It doesn't cost you anything, but it will help me understand what story to publish for you next. Let's move on. The summit continued as if nothing had happened. That was the strangest part. Music resumed. Low, harmonic tones produced by instruments I couldn't name. Servants returned to circulating with trays of glowing drinks and sculpted dishes. Conversations restarted in careful, artificial voices. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked like the interruption had been nothing more than a brief breach of etiquette. From where I sat, beside the Empress of the Astra Dominion, it felt like sitting at the center of a minefield that everyone pretended wasn't there. I could feel them watching me. Not openly, not anymore. Now it was side glances, reflected looks in polished crystal goblets, the subtle tilt of alien heads angled just enough to suggest interest without admitting it. The laughter had vanished completely. In its place was calculation. Naira sat beside me with perfect composure. She ate sparingly, spoke politely, acknowledged greetings with the precise level of warmth required by rank and history. To anyone else, she was the image of imperial control. To me, she was coiled tension. I realized it when she leaned slightly toward me, her voice barely audible beneath the music. "Do you know why they laughed?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I was easy," I said. "Because no one would stop them." A faint curve touched the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. Something sharper. "Yes," she said. "And because they believed it was safe." She lifted her goblet, eyes still forward. "Tell me, Jack Miller, when you entered that hall, who did you notice first?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The laughter," she clarified. "Who laughed immediately? Who joined later? Who did not laugh at all?" I thought back. The memory came uncomfortably clear now that I was forced to examine it. Faces. Reactions. Timing. "There were a few who laughed right away," I said slowly. Loudly, like they wanted to be seen doing it. Others waited. Looked around first. And some, I hesitated. Some didn't react. They just watched. Naira nodded once. "And the guards?" she prompted. "They didn't laugh," I said. "But they moved fast. Like they already knew what they were supposed to do." Her fingers tapped the table once. "Satisfied. I did not stand for you because I am sentimental," she said quietly. "Nor because I enjoy chaos, though it has its uses. I stood because I needed to see them revealed." "Revealed how?" I asked. She finally turned her head and looked at me directly. "When power shifts," she said, "people show their truest selves. Some rush to assert dominance. Some wait to see who will win. Some fear being noticed at all." Her gaze drifted back across the hall. "You were never the mistake, Jack Miller. You were the measure." The weight of her words settled slowly, like snow covering something dangerous underneath. You knew this would happen, I said. I suspected, she corrected. You were invited because you were human, because you had no faction here, no house, no allies, no protection. You were the perfect variable. My stomach tightened. So I was bait. Yes. She didn't soften it, didn't apologize. And, she continued, did you yield? I thought of the guards, of the laughter, of the moment I'd realized no one was coming to save me. No, I said. I didn't. Naira inclined her head. Good. A noble approached then, tall, iridescent-skinned, eyes like polished amber. He bowed to Naira with flawless precision, then turned his attention to me. Your Majesty, he said, may I inquire the role of your guest? Naira didn't answer immediately. She reached for her goblet, took a measured sip, then set it down. This is Jack Miller, she said. Temporary liaison to the human frontier. The word temporary hung in the air, carefully chosen. The noble's eyes flicked to me, then back to her. A curious appointment. So is your continued presence at this table, Naira replied calmly. Yet here we both are. The noble bowed again, more stiffly this time, and withdrew. I exhaled only after he was gone. You enjoy this, I said under my breath. I endure it, she corrected. There is a difference. She leaned back slightly, armor plates shifting with a soft, controlled sound. The summit is not what it appears to be, she continued. Officially, it is about unity, trade, shared borders, symbolism. And unofficially? I asked. Her eyes hardened. Unofficially, it is about succession, she said. About whether my rule will stabilize or fracture. I absorbed that in silence. They will not challenge me openly, she went on. Not yet. Not while the blood of my predecessor is still fresh in the laws. But they will test me, probe, undermine, measure my reactions. Her gaze flicked to me again, just as they measured yours. Something cold slid into place in my chest. And what happens now? I asked. Now, Naira said, I observe who adapts. A server approached with a new dish, placing it carefully before me. I stared at it, some kind of layered, translucent food that glowed faintly at the edges. It's safe, Naira said, without looking. I checked. That surprised me more than anything else so far. You checked, I repeated. Yes. She paused. I always know who enters my station. I picked up the utensil, still processing that. And what did you see? I asked. When you looked me up, she was quiet for a moment. A man who has already lost everything that once made him afraid, she said finally. Those are the most dangerous kind. Around us, the summit continued. Alliances whispered into existence. Rivalries sharpened behind polite smiles. But I understood something now that I hadn't when I first walked in. This wasn't over. It had barely begun. And somewhere in the laughter that had died too quickly, Naira Solen had already found her enemies. I didn't become a liaison in a ceremony. There was no announcement, no formal decree broadcast across Astra Prime, no symbol pinned to my chest or oath demanded in front of witnesses. One moment I was a man without a seat, and the next I was a problem the Empire had decided not to discard. That was how Naira did things, I learned quickly, quietly, precisely, like setting stones beneath the surface of water and watching who stumbled when the current changed. The summit ended 3 hours later. When the final address concluded and the nobles filed out in carefully ordered clusters, I expected to be escorted back to whatever forgotten quarters I'd been assigned when I first arrived. Instead, Naira stood, nodded once to the hall, and said, "You'll come with me." It wasn't a question. We left through a side passage hidden behind the dais, the kind of corridor no one notices until they're not allowed to use it. The walls were smooth, dark, faintly luminous, etched with lines that pulsed in slow, deliberate patterns. Imperial space. Not decorative. Functional. Walk on my right, Naira said without looking at me. It discourages certain assumptions. I did. The guards flanking us adjusted their spacing subtly, not closing in on me, not quite giving me room either. I clocked it automatically. Old habits. Corporate corridors on Earth had taught me how much distance meant. We didn't speak until the door sealed behind us. You understand that nothing you saw out there was accidental, Naira said as we walked. I do now, I replied. I just didn't realize how big the game was. Her pace didn't change. It is not a game. No, I said. Games have rules everyone agrees on. That earned me a glance. Brief. Assessing. She led me into a chamber overlooking the station's core, an immense open space where ships slid in and out along invisible lanes, lights threading through darkness like living things. The view was dizzying. "This is as far as coincidence goes," Naira said. "From here on, everything is intent." She turned to face me fully. "Jack Miller," she continued, "you are now my temporary human liaison." The words landed heavier than they sounded. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you observe," she said. "You listen. You tell me what my court will not." "That's it?" I asked. "No authority? No protection?" Her eyes sharpened. "Protection is contextual. Authority is earned." I exhaled slowly. "You're serious?" "Yes." I rubbed a hand over my face, trying to ground myself. "You said I was a measure. A test." "I said you were one," she corrected. "The summit itself was another." That made me look up. "What do you mean?" Naira turned back to the viewport. "Astra Prime is neutral ground in theory," she said. "In practice, it is where ambitious people gather when they think the crown is weakest." "And they think that about you," I said. "They hope it," she replied. "There is a difference." She folded her hands behind her back. "During the first months of a new reign, there is always unrest. But this summit was accelerated. Too many factions eager to attend. Too many old rivals suddenly eager to speak of unity." "You think someone's planning something," I said. "I know they are," she said calmly. "The only question was how." I frowned. "So you invite them all here? Under one roof?" "Yes. And you bring in a human with no standing," I said slowly, the pieces clicking together, "to see who reacts." "Not just who reacts," Naira said. "Who reveals intent." I felt a chill run through me. "The laughter," I said. "The speed. The confidence." She nodded. "Those who laughed first believe tradition will shield them. Those who waited are watching the balance of power. Those who stayed silent are dangerous." "And me?" I asked. She turned back to me. "You are the unpredictable element," she said. "A human carries no weight here. No precedent. No obligation. That makes you invisible to strategy." I almost laughed. "That's one way to put it." "You think you were named liaison as a courtesy," Naira continued. "You were named so that when things move, you will already be inside the room." "And if I get crushed?" I asked. She met my gaze without flinching. "Then I will know exactly how far they are willing to go." The honesty of it took my breath away. "You're using me to flesh out a coup," I said. "Yes." "And if they succeed?" Her jaw tightened. "Just slightly. Then the empire fractures." I leaned against the railing, staring out at the traffic below. "You're betting everything." "I already have," she said quietly. "The moment I took the throne." Silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Why me?" Naira didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was lower. "Because you walked into that hall knowing you didn't belong," she said. "And you did not leave when they told you to." I thought about that. About how close I'd been to folding, to letting myself be erased. "And because," she added, "those who have nothing left to lose see the truth more clearly than those who fear losing power." I swallowed. "You don't know that about me." She looked at me again, really looked this time. "I know enough," she said. "And I will know more soon." She stepped past me toward the exit. "You will be housed in the inner ring. Not the trade district. Not the guest quarters." "That's going to upset people," I said. "Yes," she replied. "That is the point." As the doors opened, she paused. "Jack," she said, using my name deliberately. "From this moment on, everything you experience will be watched. Every reaction measured. Every weakness noted." I nodded. I figured. A faint, dangerous smile crossed her face. "Good," she said, "because the bait phase is over." And for the first time since I'd arrived on Astra Prime, I understood the truth. I hadn't survived the summit. I'd been deployed. The attempt on my life came 3 days later. Not dramatically. Not during a speech or a public procession. No grand betrayal under chandeliers or in front of witnesses. It came quietly, efficiently, like the kind of violence meant to leave no story behind, which told me everything I needed to know. I had started to learn the inner ring of Astra Prime by then. The corridors there weren't meant for comfort. They were meant for control, long, clean lines, neutral colors, lighting calibrated to reduce fatigue and emotion. Even the air felt measured. You didn't live there. You operated there. I was walking alone. That should have been my first warning. Naira had assigned guards, Technically. But not constantly. Not visibly. Too much protection makes you predictable, she'd said. And predictability is an invitation. I understood the logic, even if I didn't love it. The inner gardens were one of the few places I allowed myself to slow down. Crystalline growths shaped like trees caught the station's artificial light and bent it into soft, shifting colors. The path beneath my feet hummed faintly with energy recycling. It was almost peaceful. That was my second mistake. I heard the sound a split second before my brain processed it. A sharp displacement of air behind me. Wrong for the space. Wrong for the stillness. Years of instinct kicked in before thought. I moved. The blade passed where my throat had been. I stumbled forward, heart slamming into my ribs, spun hard on my heel, and saw him. Valentian. Armored. Masked. Taller than me by a full head, limbs built for speed and reach. The weapon in his hand wasn't ceremonial. It was functional. Matte. Narrow. Designed for penetration rather than spectacle. You shouldn't have been here, he said, voice filtered in calm. I backed away slowly, hands raised, not in surrender, but balance. My mind raced, cataloging exits. There were none. The garden narrowed behind me, crystalline growths forming a dead end designed for contemplation, not escape. I'm just a liaison, I said, keeping my voice steady. I don't matter. He tilted his head. You matter enough. He came at me again. I dodged clumsily, barely avoiding a slash that would have gutted me. My foot slipped on the smooth surface of the path, and I went down hard, pain exploding through my shoulder. This was it, then. No guards. No dramatic rescue. Just a quiet correction. They laughed when you walked in, the assassin said, stepping closer. They were right to. I forced myself to my feet, breath ragged. If you kill me, I said, you make me a martyr. He laughed softly. Humans don't get martyrs here. They get forgotten. He lunged. I didn't beg. I don't know why that mattered so much to me in that moment. Maybe because begging had never saved me before. Not when my career collapsed back on Earth. Not when my marriage fell apart. Not when I watched everything I loved slip out of reach one concession at a time. So instead, I stood my ground. I met his eyes through the mask and said, then do it. Something flickered. Just for a fraction of a second. Hesitation? Surprise? It was enough. The blast hit him square in the chest. Energy slammed into armor and flesh, throwing him backward into the crystal wall with a sound like breaking glass. The blade clattered across the path, spinning uselessly before coming to rest at my feet. I stared, stunned, heart still trying to tear its way out of my chest. Then I saw her. Empress Naira Solen stood at the entrance to the garden, sidearm raised, expression carved from ice. Guards poured in behind her in disciplined silence, weapons trained, movements precise. Take him, she said. They did. The assassin was still alive, barely, but that was intentional. I realized it as they hauled him up, restraints snapping into place. Naira hadn't aimed to kill. She'd aimed to answer questions. When the guards disappeared with him, Naira turned her attention to me. She looked me over in the same way one inspects a damaged structure, methodically, without panic, cataloging what still stood. You're hurt, she said. Nothing vital, I replied. My voice shook despite my best efforts. She holstered the weapon. Good. That's it. I asked. Good? You're alive, she said. That was the variable. Anger flared then, sharp and sudden. You knew this would happen. Yes. You let it happen, I said. Her gaze didn't waver. I allowed the attempt. I took a step toward her, fists clenched. I could have died. You could have, she agreed. You didn't. Silence pressed down between us, heavy and electric. Finally, she spoke again, quieter this time. They moved faster than expected, she said. Which tells me something. What? I asked. That those who laughed first were not merely cruel, she said. They were confident. I swallowed. Confident enough to kill. Yes. She stepped closer. And you confirmed something for me. I laughed once, harsh and humorless. Let me guess. That I'm still useful. That you are exactly what they fear, she corrected. A human who will not yield. I looked at the shattered crystal wall behind her, at the place where I'd almost bled out alone and forgotten. I didn't do it for you, I said. Or your empire. I know, she replied. That's why it matters. She turned toward the exit. Come. You won't walk alone again. As we left the garden, I realized something chilling. The attempt on my life wasn't a failure. It was confirmation. And somewhere in the shadows of Astra Prime, the people who had laughed were already realizing they'd made a mistake. The emergency council was convened 12 hours after the assassination attempt. That alone told me how badly things had shifted. The Council of Astra Prime did not move quickly. Speed implied fear, and fear was something the old houses pretended not to feel. Decisions were usually buried under ritual, layered beneath precedent, debated until urgency suffocated itself. An emergency session meant the machinery of tradition had failed to slow the moment down. Naira wanted this to happen now. I stood at the edge of the Grand Council chamber, high above the floor on a narrow observation tier reserved for witnesses, analysts, and, occasionally, examples. The chamber itself was a vast circular space carved from obsidian crystal, its surface veined with slow-moving light like a living thing. 17 seats formed a ring below, each representing one of the ruling houses. At the center stood the Imperial platform. Naira's platform. She hadn't asked me to stay hidden. She'd told me to stand where I could be seen. The counselors arrived in waves, robes whispering, eyes sharp. I recognized several of the ones who had laughed at the summit. Their expressions now were tight, controlled, irritation barely masking something deeper. Concern, calculation, fear. Lord Kaler arrived last. He didn't look at me as he took his seat. That confirmed it. The council will come to order, intoned the chamber's harmonic system. Naira entered without ceremony. No armor this time. No weapons visible. She wore the crown lightly, almost deceptively so, dark metal traced with living light. She walked to the center and did not sit. I have called you here, she said, voice carrying without amplification, because there has been an act of treason within the imperial ring. Murmurs rippled outward. Kaler leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. Strong words, Your Majesty. Yes, Naira said calmly. They are. She raised one hand. A holofield ignited above the center of the chamber. The assassin appeared. Bound. Bloodied. Alive. The recording began. His confession played without interruption. Names. Orders. Payments routed through shell houses and ceremonial funds. The instruction was clear. Eliminate the human liaison and observe the Empress's response. If she yielded, proceed with political pressure. If she retaliated, escalate. When the projection ended, silence filled the chamber. Naira turned slowly, her gaze settling on Kaler. Lord Kaler, she said, you sponsored the summit's expanded guest list. Kaler smiled thinly, as many did. You argued publicly that inviting lesser species would expose weakness, she continued. I argue tradition, he replied smoothly. And privately, Naira said, you ordered a man killed. The smile vanished. This is a fabrication, Kaler said sharply. The word of an assassin. Corroborated by financial records, verified chains of command, and the testimony of 2 intermediaries, Naira cut in. Yes, I know. She took a step forward. You believed the human expendable, she said. You believed his death would corner me. That I would either do nothing and appear weak, or strike back and justify your accusations. Kaler rose from his seat. This is about sentiment, he snapped. You have compromised yourself, Naira. You let a human sit at your side. You housed him in the inner ring. You allowed personal attachment to cloud. That human, Naira said, her voice suddenly hard, stood alone in my hall while you laughed. The words hit like a blade. She turned, gesturing upward. Jack Miller, she said. Step forward. Every eye in the chamber swung to me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I moved to the edge of the observation tier. The distance between us felt enormous. Symbolic. Intentional. Tell them, Naira said. What happened in the gardens? I took a breath. And I told the truth. I told them about the blade at my throat. About being hunted through a place meant for peace. About standing at a dead end with nothing left but the choice to beg or refuse. I didn't survive because of guards, I said, my voice echoing. I survived because I didn't give him what he wanted. Kaler laughed once, harsh. You expect us to be moved by human pride? Naira turned on him. No, she said. I expect you to recognize it. She faced the council. This human had no title, she said. No weapon. No allies. No reason to believe anyone would save him. Her eyes burned. And yet he did not yield. The chamber was utterly silent now. That, Naira continued, is why I rule. Gasps followed. Outrage. Fury. You compare yourself to him? Kaler demanded. You are Empress of 17 systems. And I was once underestimated, Naira said. Dismissed. Expected to step aside. She raised her chin. I stood where he stood, she said. And I did not yield either. She drew the ceremonial blade from her side. Not threatening, not dramatic, simply present. I accuse Lord Kaler of treason against the crown, she said. The charge, conspiracy, attempted assassination, and abuse of imperial law. The chamber erupted. Naira didn't raise her voice. I call for a countervote, she said. Not on my fitness to rule, but on his. One by one, lights flared beside the council seats. Kaler's allies hesitated, then folded. When the final count resolved, Kaler stood alone. Guards moved in. As they passed beneath the observation tier, Kaler looked up at me for the first time. This changes nothing, he hissed. You're still nothing. I met his gaze. Maybe, I said. But you're done. They took him away. The chamber emptied slowly after that. Naira remained standing until the last counselor had gone. Then she looked up at me. Come, she said. Later, in a quiet antechamber overlooking the stars, she removed the crown and set it aside. Without it, she looked younger. Tired. You didn't have to do that, I said. Put me at the center of it. Yes, she replied. I did. She met my eyes. They needed to see that the human who refused to yield survived. She paused, and that I protect what I choose to stand beside. Something settled between us then, not relief, not victory. Resolve. The Empire had changed that day, and so had I. I didn't stay because she saved my life. That would have been simple, clean, a debt you could name, repay, and eventually walk away from. I stayed because after the council dispersed, after the lights dimmed, after Lord Kaler's seat was quietly removed from the ring, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in years. I mattered here, not as a symbol, not as bait, not even as a human curiosity placed beside a throne to provoke tradition. I mattered because I chose not to disappear when the galaxy gave me every excuse to. Naira and I stood together at the viewport in her private chambers, watching Astra Prime rotate beneath us. From this height, the station looked peaceful, ordered, as if power didn't grind people down into decisions they could never undo. They won't stop, I said. You know that. I do, Naira replied. They will whisper, plot, wait for weakness. She turned to me. They will test us. Us. The word landed softly and stayed. You could ask me to leave, I said. It would make things quieter, safer. She studied my face for a long moment, then shook her head. Quiet is how rot spreads. I thought about Earth, about how often I'd chosen quiet over truth, how it had cost me everything anyway. I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go, I said. I could leave tomorrow, find work in neutral space, disappear. Naira nodded. I know. I'm staying, I continued, because this empire is standing at a fault line, and because someone needs to say what others are afraid to. Her eyes softened, not weak, never that, but unguarded. Then stay, she said. Not as my shield, not as my excuse. Stay because you choose to. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the faint hum of the station through the floor, the quiet weight of everything pressing forward. I choose to, I said. She reached for my hand, not for the court, not for spectacle, just because she needed the contact. Because so did I. Beyond the viewport, ships moved like distant stars, unaware of the shift taking place inside these walls. They had laughed when I walked in. Now, somewhere deep in the machinery of the Empire, a second chair had been added beside the Empress's throne, human-sized. And for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like running from what came next. Whatever storms followed, political, personal, or far worse, I would face them where I stood. Beside her, not as a guest, but as something new the galaxy hadn't planned for. Write in the comments whether this story impressed you. If so, write at what point. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. If you want to listen to more such stories, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. You have nothing to lose, and you can change it at any time. Good luck. See you in the next video.